Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, Season 4, Episode 7. How do you get around?
Oh, I get around.
Right round, baby, right round.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build.
Offering a horse, a kingdom for my horse, and if you can get me a teleport, we can double that.
I'll just take some decent sneakers. He's Jeff Ingram, and I'm Michael Milko. Yeah, Michael. Yes. Yeah, can't even say my
Michael
own name.
Milker.
Just milking the bad jokes as much as I can. Can't even say my own name this morning. I am Michael Miller. He is Jeff Ingram. Welcome to the world.
Does that mean I can call you Mikey?
No, it does not. This episode is being brought to you by the MTA because we are talking about transportation.
That's right.
Not actually being sponsored by the MTA.
Need your Charlie card this week. Actually, there's a neat story of why it's called the Charlie card, but maybe that will be included.
I love neat stories. Go for it.
So anyone
I've never heard it.
Boston.
So what is a Charlie card, first of all?
A Charlie card is specifically what they call your transit card in Boston.
Your MTA card, your
MTA, yep.
Your train card. Does it go on trains and buses or just trains? Because in New York,
I'm not sure,
you can use
because
it for
I typically just use the subway system when I go there. You know, technically one of the lines is a bus. I think it's the Silver Line, or at least it used to be, where it's the one right downtown. It's really it's like a magic busway, as they call them in Hartford.
In New York, it used to be these little metal tokens, even as late when I was there, and I left in 2000.
They still have tokens in 2000.
They still had tokens. They were less like Metro cards were just starting to come into popularity.
Oh, okay.
So they had them, but not all stops could receive a card yet. They hadn't installed all the readers. Yeah. So tokens were still, viable. The buses, you'd get like a monthly pass or some sort of, plan pass like that. And the buses could also take a subway token, as I remember, but the pass could not be used for the train. So it wasn't back and forth. And of course, now they've, made it so that your Metro card, which is just a digital, disposable thing that connects to a digital account, or like a gift card at like Target or something. But you know what I found out? That I didn't think they could do this. They expire.
Really?
So, yeah, I found this out because I have one on my desk right here, and I had maybe $5-10 on it from last time Sarah and I went to New York, and I was like, oh, this is good. I'll just hold on to it. And, next time we go down, I'll have it. But because of COVID, we haven't been down in, at least 2 years. Yeah. And I was just looking at it the other day, and it has an expiration date on it. So I'm like, well, crap.
That's
$10. Yeah. I didn't think that was legal. I mean, at least in Connecticut.
Well, I know they'll go after retailers who have their gift cards expire, but that's different than the subway cards, I guess.
Oh, well, that's, that's the city. That's,
that's different.
That's city money.
That's right. No. So, and it's funny. I knew this being a kid from Indiana. My wife did not know it, who, obviously lived in Boston a little bit during her college years. And
you knew this coming from Indiana, but she didn't know it having been in Boston. I'm confused.
Having been in Boston, yeah. Well, because people call it the Charlie card because that's what it is, and it stems back to there's this folk group called the Kingston Trio, and they were political activists as well. And essentially, what happened was, they raised the fare on the subway there. I think they called
particular one, or
all of them. Essentially, the Boston Metro.
But
line.
Specifically, you're referring to Boston. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yes,
okay.
Specifically Boston. Okay. They raised the rates. I know, like they doubled it from like 5 cents to 10 cents or something like that. But
which at the time
it created a stir at the time because they raised the rates, because this is supposed to be the way common people could get around. And so this band, the Kingston Trio, made a song, and there was this character called Charlie who never returned because he went on. And if you've ever driven a train, especially in Europe, I don't know if you can still do this in Amtrak today or not, but you could actually get on the train and pay for tickets on the train. So what would happen is you would go get on the train and someone would come around and collect the money. So the song was about this guy, Charlie, who went on and didn't have the extra nickel. And so he never came home. So, but because of that
Seems
controversy, that character, Charlie, is the reason why they're called Charlie cards, to make sure you have enough money to get around. So it's kind of like the city going, ha ha ha, we'll take your song and use it forever and raise rates to, God knows, a little bit more than a dime at this point.
The thing that's funny about that is that you for a while, I think you can still get on a train without having paid. You at least you could on Metro North, and there was another significant line. I went from New York to DC, and I went from New York to Philadelphia, and from Philadelphia to DC. And I was really cutting it close on getting the train. Usually you pay a little extra fee if you buy it. If you buy it on the train, it's like, 5-10% more. There's a $5-10 fee or whatever. So but the conductor comes around, gets your tickets. I rode all the way to DC without seeing a single conductor, and no one came to get my ticket. So
awesome.
I was like, I felt bad. No, I had the money. I felt bad. I just, and got off the train. This is my song.
When I was stationed in Germany, we take the train back and forth. The closest decent sized city was Wurzburg. And so occasionally we would go down there to interact with locals. And after probably would cause too much trouble with the local bar scene. But we would hop on, and a lot of times, especially when alcohol would be involved, you'd forget to get your tickets, or you'd run out or whatever. And then, I never had an issue with the conductor didn't show up to take my money. So I guess,
I think
good for you. You beat the system that day. That's also the country where they would put like coin charging tokens, I think, on the train stations. You go in the bathroom, into the stall, the door would close and lock shut, and you have to put money to get out.
No, when I was there, it was quite the opposite. You had to pay to get in.
Well, I think they maybe changed it because what would happen is people wouldn't, like, especially tourists or whatever, you would have no clue.
Right.
And the logic would make sense, right? Like, we don't want to prevent you from going to the bathroom, but you have to pay to get out. The problem being, if you don't have the money to pay to get out,
now you're stuck in the toilet.
You're stuck in the toilet.
Well, and the other problem with that is, what if somebody else wants to use it? So they come in. You could just sit there quietly if there's a bunch of people that need to use it. Go in, use it, and wait. Oh no, because you'd have to. I was thinking somebody else could come in and open it, but no, they're going to walk in for free, but they can't because you locked it. So
because it's locked on you. That's true. But the quirky things of travel, but this we're talking about modern day travel. It's fairly, the thing is, we complain that there isn't enough space on our airplane flights,
my complaint is not that there's not enough space. There is little space depending on which section of the plane you're in. My big complaint is them overselling the plane. I think that is ethically wrong. Like,
yes, I agree. But even though I've benefited from that. I've benefited directly from that when I was in the service, so I can only complain so much.
Selling 75 tickets for a plane that only has 60 seats is wrong. I get it. People cancel, and sometimes people miss flights. Fine, I get that.
It's not only that, though.
It's still not right.
I'll tell you, as a person who develops a website, it's the question of when do you reserve the seat that you're paying for? So essentially, I say that there's room on the flight. You click in there. It takes you X amount of time to purchase your ticket. Do I reserve the ticket? And you'll see this in concerts where it's like, you have 35 seconds to get to the next page, or you lose your.
I don't like that. So
do you do that? Or do you just sit there and just let the person pay for it? And then when it's done, they have a place on the plane, but then you risk overselling. So it's actually kind of it's a little bit more difficult than people realize, selling seats online. But I agree with Michael. I think they do purposely oversell seats because they expect
Well, they do
1 or 2%
that's a known fact
will not go on it. But I also remember when I got out of the service and I was unemployed, going back home, and I flew up from Georgia, I think, to Charlotte, and then from Charlotte I was going to fly into Hafen. And when I landed in Charlotte, they were overbooked. So they're like, if anyone's willing to step off, we'll give you a first class ticket on the next leg, and we'll give you a free tickets to go anywhere in the continental United States, valid for a year. So I'm like, let's see, I'm unemployed. I have literally no prospects, So yeah, I'll take that, And then I use that to go visit my uncle, it actually, for me, it worked out, but that's because I had nothing to do. It's annoying if you had somewhere to be and they were like, no, bye.
I watched a video the other day that apparently there's something like it's a legal mandate by, what is it, the FCC or the FAA? FAA governs the airport. And it's something like if you are bumped from a flight for that, in that situation, they're like legally obligated to compensate you for if it has to be for more than an hour or something. Like if the next flight is 10 minutes from now we got on the plane going, I can get on that one instead. But if it's like, we got to hold you up for 3 hours, they're legally obligated to compensate you for 4 times the cost of the ticket.
Yeah.
So that even on a cheap ticket, that's a lot of money.
Well, and it's shocking too. It's like to Hartford, there are so few flights that you're guaranteed to get compensated if you get bumped. Orlando, maybe not so much. They might get you somewhere else. And I wonder if the airlines ever work together on that. Like, hey, can I throw this jerk on your plane to get him out of here? And we'll shift the fare to you or something like that. Who knows? Unless it's Southwest, which the other airlines hate JetBlue and Southwest. So,
well, regardless, all of this is riveting material.
Riveting material. Yes, right. Everyone's like, wow. But we're actually talking about other people traveling. And we're kind of focusing on medieval travel in Europe. And I want to do more episodes on this because the topic fascinates me. Even travel today apparently fascinates me. But the idea is, there's this concept of the tavern / inn trope that there's a tavern / inn in every town. The adventurers go there, they get their adventures from it's like you go to the tavern keep, and it's almost like he's in charge of the local adventurers guild, and you go in and get your jobs, and then you go out and do your jobs in role-playing games, at least. And even in a lot of fantasy stories, there are that moment in the tavern that's essential to the story. And not always, but a lot of times. And the simple fact is most towns, and villages didn't have a tavern or an inn. They probably had a tavern place for people to go drink between gigs, but there wasn't necessarily rooms available to stay there. Like towns like London obviously had them, but most, medieval, towns just did not have the wealth to waste on that because the number of travelers would not pay for it. But the interesting thing in medieval times in Europe, poor people started to travel for the first time. And it was, we talked about this a little bit in episode 6, where it was religiously motivated for pilgrimage. But I think it was partially an excuse too. Like we can afford, we have enough excess now that we can travel to go see the spires of Canterbury or something like that and see what's along the way. It was more than just, probably, back in antiquity, if you were poor, you would travel to market and the next largest town, and that would probably be the farthest you would ever go in your life. You still had the risk of bandits and stuff like that. But, as the government's ability to control the countryside got a little bit better too. So it was possibly a little bit safer to travel on land, although sometimes the lords themselves were the problem. If you're a peasant, though, it's like you would much less likely be bothered. If you're a lord traveling by land, you'd probably be kidnapped if possible to ransom back to your own lands. But that's a different episode. But thinking specifically, about English pilgrimages, and I think it's similar in many continental places in Europe as well too at the time. I know Japan had its own system of inns, and a very, in Japanese flair, a very rigorous system of how and why you can travel. You probably had to show means. You needed a special passport to go on your trip, and you'd have to show
just to move around within the country.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So like if I was like a smith in a town, I want to go visit my siblings in another town, I would need a letter giving me permission to do that. Huh. And if you didn't have that, and there was a huge business to smuggle people around, these little fortified inns. You had to show your papers when you went through them. This kind of the predecessor, I guess, to the modern day passport. But it was to show, I don't know, one, that you weren't out for nefarious reasons, maybe, probably something to do with controlling the local population as well. They probably didn't want people moving around, and screwing up the economy by moving somewhere where it was better tax rates and stuff like that. That might have played into it as well, too. I don't know.
Possibly.
But I want to look more at that. I'm doing some more research there. I know. And you have the Hajj, from, where people would do pilgrimages to Mecca as well. And that's something I want to research more, because that's going to be a little bit different. But an important like hospitality system set up definitely in the Middle East as well because of that. And then anywhere the Arabic influence or the Islamic influence reached out to. And but those will need to go into a different episode. I just don't know enough to BS about those. Any more than I just have. But so here, some of the things I was thinking about too is, if I'm, poor peasant Jeff, we'll call him, and I'm traveling on pilgrimages, if there isn't an inn to stay into, like, I can pay a few copper to sleep in your, common room. Where do I sleep? And then that led me to an inevitable question, like, how do I eat? Because there's three really important things to travel. How do you get somewhere? There's no metro. I can't afford, to start a caravan. I probably don't have the skill set that will let me into a caravan.
Well, you can pay to get into a caravan, though. That's
you can pay, but you would have to pay to do that.
Right.
Right. And if I'm poor, if I'm plebe Jeff, can I afford to do that? I guess it would be possible. It would depend on how common they probably are in the area that you're traveling. Which, let me think, walking, eating, and sleeping are the three biggest things that you have to consider.
Well, isn't security
as
also,
a lower class traveler?
Isn't security also? There's bandits on the road. All those steps.
Yeah, of course. And so you'd probably walk with other people if they were available. But yeah, to me, security kind of goes across that. And if you stay somewhere too, if I go into someone's barn, they have to be concerned about me. What if I just steal some eggs in the morning and take off? And I have to be worried about them too. What prevents them from coming in and stabbing me and taking my clothes?
Yeah.
They
don't have to necessarily stab you, but they could just straight up rob you and be like, yeah, I don't know what happened to your stuff. And we went to bed and it was out there with you in the barn. Well, yeah, but I woke up and all of my stuff was gone. I don't know what to tell you.
It was orcs, I say.
I was in the house, so
possibly an orc raiding party came through and robbed you and stabbed you.
Of course, it is the most likely of scenarios,
especially in medieval England. But we're obviously expand this out a bit to think a little bit more about, kind of what was in place there, and then we'll think a little bit about how this can affect fantasy settings or whatever, because there are differences between fantasy and actual real world. Shocking. No. But so walking, I think walking and hitchhiking are probably your two most common forms of travel. I'm going to walk 200 miles to go see something because I can. It would obviously not be during harvest or planting season, but in between, if things have been going pretty good, I have a good store set up that gives me the access to consider this as a possibility. I obviously would have to pay my way though. Walking is cheap, but it takes time. But in days before TV and working 9-to-5 jobs, time was something that was more common. This would be time in ancient Egypt where you'd go off to start working on pyramid construction. So or some great monument, so but now it's like, in a way, there's a little bit more freedom, for peasantry at least, to do things. So compared to previous days, which isn't saying much, but I did some very generic research, and I found an actual site. It might have even been like a Ren Fair group that was talking about like how travel really worked time wise. And they had some interesting information. Like, an average person could travel about 10 miles a day. And that's because you have to stop and eat. There's other activities you have to do. They said a full-time courier whose job was to travel would probably get up to 40 miles a day. So that's kind of like your walking range. And when you're storytelling, this is kind of important numbers to know, because, if I want to talk about, the walk from the Shire to Mordor, it should take the length of time it takes to walk, and if it's 10 miles, that's a day. And if it's more than 10 miles, it's more than one day. And so then you have to consider all of these things about how do you sleep? How do you eat within that? The travel to Mordor, is a long journey. They won't simply let you in, but they will not feed you along the way either. By horse, the travel looks more like about 60 miles a day. And these aren't for armies moving. Those are different numbers, and that's a different episode. This is strictly for lone people or small groups of people out on the road, or at least not uniformly working together. And these aren't necessarily exactly true, but one, if you could afford a horse, you radically cut down your trip time, but you radically increase the cost of your trip because you have to feed a horse. And that's one of the things that sometimes we forget about is, the pack animals that we bring in adventuring parties. We don't often feed them in game.
Yeah, lots of upkeep. It always bothers me when I see some sort of fantasy show, and obviously, I don't need the superest of realism, but it's like you see this character, and they have to travel from point A to point B, and it's like hundreds of miles, and they have like a sword and like an itty bitty belt pouch, and it's like, he would need food. He would need water. And then it's like, oh, there's a horse too. Okay. Well, that thing doesn't, just run forever. It needs food and water as well. Yeah. So it cracks me up.
You watch Gandalf traveling in Lord of the Rings, and he hops on his horse and goes at top speed for 2,000 miles. And you're like, wow, that's good magic.
Yeah. Well,
it's like horses can't run all day. They will run until they die, but they will die. And a lot of times it doesn't even get mentioned. I know
the horses in Lord of the Rings, specifically Shadowfax, is a magical horse. So there is that. They do kind of, magic is definitely, Tolkien definitely uses magic as a Swiss Army knife. Magic solves everything. So,
which I think in a way is okay in fantasy, because the whole point is it should be mystical. I kind of like hinting that why. And not, Shadowfax is the king of the horses. Well, are the eagles going to come and save us today too? Oh, okay.
Oh, they are. Okay, great. No, that's great. This is that works for us. Thank you.
Yay, it's eagles. But you do have this limitation of travel. So, if you're traveling from York to Canterbury, in England, that is a pretty significant pilgrimage if you're walking 10 miles a day. And the thing is, and you are strictly limited if you're poor. One, if the town you come to doesn't have a place for you to buy food, which I find doubtful. I think if you come to a village, even if they don't have like an official tavern set up, someone there is probably going to have excess food that they're willing to sell for money.
Or you occasionally run into kind people that will just help you out and give it to you.
Yes, especially
Doubtful. but possible.
And if you're on a more common pilgrimage, there will be more likely that there are going to be entrepreneurs who set up in key locations where they know that people typically go to. And you'll start to see a growth of commerce along pilgrimage routes because money is moving along there. And any individual might not have a lot, but there will be enough to attract, at first low-level merchants, people who will start merchant companies, in these locations and then maybe grow them out. Maybe a local peasant ends up becoming a merchant because he starts setting up a shop out of his house, selling bread to people who go past. Which leads me to the next one is, what the heck do people eat? Is the peas porridge 9 days old? That doesn't sound healthy.
Is the what?
The peas porridge.
Peas?
Peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot 9 days old.
I've never
heard that one.
Okay.
That's like an old nursery rhyme. Okay. And so like the one I found, porridge is actually relatively new food. So that had nothing to do with medieval, which once again just shattered my reality of life, but I didn't care. But essentially when
it's got to be Dickensian old.
When people would travel, there's a couple things they would eat. Bread.
Yeah, go to.
And if you have that really crusty bread, guess what? It can last a little bit. Yeah. The trick is, and one of the things is, once you cook a dinner, you will eat that dinner until it's gone. Mm-hmm. And so if you somehow get stew, which would probably be a very common meal, you would eat the stew the next morning as well too, using the same bread to sop it up.
Yeah. Okay, you don't want to. You don't have Tupperware. You don't have,
But the problem is you're not bringing meat with you. And now, pre-Black Plague, the eating of meat was actually kind of rare for poorer people. But like barleys and beans and stuff like that would probably be what gets put in there. But meat is always considered a treat and gives you extra energy, especially when you're moving, which would lead me to the fact that you would have to hunt and fish along the way.
Well, that's what I was actually about to say. I figured you were going to get there.
Yes. And in my typical short, non-meandering path, I did.
Very, very concise.
Very concise. So back to trains. Wait, no.
Listen, so subway cards.
But you would have inns in larger towns. So you can still have those if you want to be realistic. In smaller towns, along the way, you can have hunting and fishing. Here's the problem. There are local laws, and it could vary radically from county to county. Now, probably in the areas you're traveling next, you would probably be somewhat similar to where you're from. But as you get further away, the likelihood that you run into a unique legal situation could be interesting. Like one I found is typically fishing is almost always allowed. Hunting is not necessarily, and especially what you hunt can get you in trouble. And then there's a couple things you could bring with you. A dog. Dogs are great for hunting. Even today, it's a legacy from, olden days that we hunters will use dogs when they go hunting. And truly before your fox hunts, it was not to make your life simple. It was not to make your sport simpler. It was literally, you would use them as a tool when you went hunting, like you would use your bow. And because remember, humans from hunter-gatherer days, we learned to hunt by wearing out the prey. So there's minimal damage to it when it gets caught. So we could take the maximum amount of benefit from the capture. And that's just a way humans learn to hunt. And that's one of the reasons humans and dogs got together so early, was because some dogs like, hey, I'll follow this guy because he'll get me food. Screw the pack. He's my alpha now. And so, but then I also learned, and I didn't realize this, ferrets were actually utilized, at least in England, as a hunting partner, because you could use them to get rabbits out of burrows, and then you could help you capture rabbits. So the idea of a ferret I always thought was more of a modern pet thing, but it's actually there's a lot of traditional on this to it, and everyone who knew that is laughing at me now, but I never knew that.
I didn't know it. Makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's the poor man's hawk. So it's easier to get your hands on a ferret, and to train a ferret to get rabbits out of burrows than it is to have a falcon on your wrist, which obviously is an option. But I would, say most people probably didn't have the expertise to train hawks, unless you had a lot of excess time on your hands and a lot of wealth. That's why rich people had hawks, and I think poor people typically had ferrets. Not all of them, but some of them. But there were stories too that I ran across. There was a guy who worked, I think, 18 miles from his home. He would run there every day. Now, the amount of time working was, only a couple hours, but he'd have to run 18 miles a day to do it. But he had a ferret he would bring along with him. So every day he had to work, he would hunt with the ferret on his way to where he was working. He would hopefully have a rabbit when he would get there that he could stew up to eat. And so this would probably make a lot of sense too, to bring them along. Beastmaster would be.
I was just going to say, I was waiting. That brings credence to Beastmaster that I did not realize. Beastmaster
is the most accurate movie ever.
Yes,
I'm going to say
very real, very historically accurate.
And the ferrets are really that smart, I believe. It's unless you can afford a dolphin, which doesn't work as good in land.
Well, they don't like to reveal their methods, but
there are really good stories of fishing towns that have collaborations every year with dolphins, which is kind of cool too, where dolphins have created a relationship with local fishermen where you'll have like the migration of fish happening in a town. The dolphins will herd the fish into the fishermen. Yep. And then between the fishermen and the dolphins, they will eat like kings, and probably try and store. The humans will probably try and store some food for the rest of the year, and the dolphins will eat well. And the cooperation between the two species works together, and it just kind of grows out over time because it worked. And the dolphins who succeeded them, it keeps working for. So it's interesting how these things end up happening naturally when you work with nature. That's how it's natural, I guess. And then the last one I'm thinking about is, okay, that's food. So you're eating stew and bread, and if you're lucky, you're getting some animals along the way. Hunting, England, was very common to use the longbow, but you could get in trouble if you were killing deer. In many places, this is the king's forest, or at least that's a trope, I believe. So
I've seen it in enough movies and read it in enough books.
So it must be real. But, there's some truth where if it's the Lord's hunting land, he doesn't want peasants hunting there. And you also have troubles too. Like an abbey would have a forest. They don't want local peasants in their forest hunting. That's their forest. So there's definitely legal ramifications. Fishing typically seems to be more generally accepted, but not hunting necessarily. But, you have English people who are proficient with creating snares. Rabbits are probably more okay because they're less hunted game. I think with rich people are going more for deer and things that take like martial prowess to take down rather than just snares. So,
snares is how you get your food. I hunt mine down. Ha ha ha.
I use my two-handed sword. Go through the forest. Very ineffective hunter. But the simple fact is, though,
what's funny about that, though, is it's like, okay, well, so you're going to spend all your day tracking down your food. To be like, I spent a couple hours this morning laying out the traps, and then I went fishing. It was both relaxing.
Right. I got fishing and
I got and I got fish, and I've got 3 rabbits and snares. So
which proves to me that I would have made a really poor medieval peasant with my inability to actually capture things on a hook when I go fishing. So I would have not been as successful at that part of being a peasant. But the last thing that left up to me was camping and lodging, because obviously you might not necessarily reach the next town every day. Now, in something like England, it's kind of consistent where you have a county, and inside of a county, you're going to have a couple villages. Um, so maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe there's always a village within a day. But what happens if you run out of like coin? You're probably bringing some coin with you that you've earned. Because if you have an opportunity, there might be times you would not mind paying to stay somewhere, if not at an inn, at another peasant's house. Like, hey, I'll give you a couple coins if you let me sleep in your barn, or if you have room in your house, like I said, Michael said, some people might, I think further out on the trails, where you don't have a lot of pilgrims, are probably more likely to be like, oh, just crash in the barn and maybe we'll have breakfast tomorrow and then you'll be on your way. But I think as you get to where more and more pilgrims, you get closer, there's just too many pilgrims coming through, you lose too many resources. So you'd become more cynical for travelers in general, and more likely you run into someone who's taking advantage, run off with like a chicken or eggs. And which, back in, pre, like someone stealing a goat would be really horrific back, pre-dark, pre-Black Death, because, people needed the milk to survive. So stealing livestock would still be probably a huntable offense. And you probably have a local village after you who steal stuff, but I'm sure it happens, and did happen. But then, do you sleep in the thicket, underneath, yeah, well, but think about though, boars aren't going to bore you if you're under a thicket. So maybe you dig yourself under a thicket and spend the night there, to help keep the wildlife off of you.
Yeah, but that might keep animals away, but then you're dealing with insects.
Of course, but you're probably infested with lice already.
Ugh.
I think that was probably more common than we like to admit, but
yeah, I'm sure it was.
I think in general, medieval people were cleaner than we think, but especially if you didn't have a floor in your house and your roof was made of grass, you're surrounded by insects all the time. So I think that's harder to get away from. And it was probably one of the reasons why you had a little bit more illness creep in too, because more likely to get flea bites and this kind of thing living in medieval days than modern day America, where you get into a car, drive to work, get out of the car, go into a building, and that's your day. But then again, you get fat and die from obesity. So the dream death of any medieval peasant. I could die from eating too much. I'll take that one, please.
Wait a minute. You die because you don't move enough? You get to relax?
Oh, Kingsman, are you?
No, that's everybody.
That's kind of the very basic, knowledge I have of traveling, and with a little bit of research, for this episode, in part to refresh me, but kind of to think of the distances and stuff like that, and the ferrets. That was a new one. And this is the reason why I typically do always a little bit of research. It's like the spit dog. You learn interesting things sometimes that you don't know exist because they're no longer relevant. I'm
sorry, did you say spit dog?
Yes.
What is a spit dog?
So essentially, it was a specially bred dog used in castles to move the spit. So they put the roast on a spit, and then a dog would walk around and all day. That's all the dog would do, and it would turn the spit.
I gotcha.
Cook the food. So it was a spit dog.
I'd never heard that before.
Not that kind of spit, but this kind of spit. So, but yeah, no, it's a very interesting thing that you go, oh, that makes perfect sense that someone would have done that. But they're obviously extinct now because once you got to the point where it became more expensive to have the animal turn it than it was to have it turn itself or something, you no longer needed it. And I would assume poor people probably never could afford to have a dog like that. That was probably in castles and palaces and stuff like that. So, but now when you think about a fantasy setting, there are some things you have to consider with travel too. Like one, go back to the thing, is it wrong to have a tavern trope? I don't think it is. I don't think it matters that much. If you want hyper realism, it's hokey having them in every town. But once again, the farther you go away from the expectation of the people in the stories you're telling, the more energy they have to understand. Well, then how is the rest of this going to happen? And you're expending story time on explaining why you're digging a hole under a thicket to sleep in, or camping, rather than just going to the inn in the town and getting the hot bath, which probably wasn't there. So that would just be the way it goes. But one is magic, obviously, always comes into play, depending on how magic works in your world. Maybe the priest, the clerical type in your group can create food and drink. That used to definitely be a thing in Dungeons and Dragons. That was very useful. Even though the clerics would be annoyed to have to waste a spell slot on that. But, I'm not going to, as the thief, carry anything around except, gems and thieves' tools and ways to break into people's houses. Not that I would play a thief, but the thieves in parties I played with were like that, very lazy. But they expect the clerics to provide food. But, I think it's okay. And it's okay too, I think, to sit there and go, you know what? I'm going to have them in a small village. Let me have them stay at someone's house, inside the house or outside the house. And then you can address questions too of, is there safety in that? Letting in, a rogue named Jeffrey into your house. Maybe he steals the peasant coin strongbox. I don't know. I'm struggling because they're peasants. They have less wealth, but if there's an opportunity, maybe he does, or maybe he doesn't, because it's not worth the risk of being chased for the next 30 miles.
Would a merchant still be considered a peasant, or is a peasant?
Almost definitely.
Okay,
I mean, that would depend on your culture too, where it's like different cultures might treat it differently. But like if you're like more of a medieval European style cultures, peasants are absolutely going to include like your artisans and stuff like that. Essentially, any non-noble or priest. Those would be like non-peasants. But you'd have like your religious group, you'd have your noble group, and then everyone else is peasant. And this started causing issues Middle Ages wise when you start to get into the Middle Ages and the High Middle Ages, where you'd have peasants who would be exceptionally more wealthy, because of the growth of technology and their ability to make money over lords and ladies who were sticking to traditional paths of, we have cottage industry set up on our land and they pay us rent, and that's how we pay for our war machine. You now have peasants who found ways to make a lot more money, who either want titles or the lords are jealous because they want that money, because they feel they should have it because they're the lord. And that does inevitably lead to conflict when that kind of stuff happens. So the interesting thing is, because of this, it would inevitably lead to conflict between the peasantry and the lords. And in some like areas where you'd have a strong central authority, if it really became a problem and the government would start to get, the emperor or whatever would start to worry, or the big king, that their power was in jeopardy, they would shut down economies rather than have, their job at risk. And so it would lead to many like dark ages, like you see this constantly, and especially in China, where, you have this massive expansion because of the centralized, authority, but then it would inevitably lock itself down to try and prevent any loss of power, which would ultimately lead to a loss of power and the turnover to a new dynasty. And then a new Renaissance period would typically follow around that period of time, and then it would over time get locked down again. It's interesting watching these things evolve over time. Where in Europe, essentially, that'd be more of a county by county basis because, rarely did someone have truly enough power to, exert their will, especially over an entire country, which is not how people think of it. But really, in Europe, it was much less control from a king or even an emperor than there would be in other parts of the world. So, it just didn't happen. But with communications and stuff like that in fantasy games, if you have more effective communications, you can have more effective command and control structures. You can exude more central authority further out to help stamp out any aspiring merchants trying to make money on the travel of local people. You can try and prevent the travel of local people, which happened in Europe as well too. As in many places, like you will stay where we tell you to live. If we need a new cobbler, we'll tell you we'll give you permission to move. You don't have the choice of doing that yourself necessarily. Which is a whole different issue, that will have to be dealt with in the world. So fantasy can have good effects by alleviating some of the issues and maybe making the ability to have that in more common. Well, because we have a local mage, we can afford less time in the fields, and someone can build up an inn in a much smaller town than you could in medieval Europe. Now, the bad side of it is if you allow the magic to exude too much, you've removed the idea of the travel part of a quest to let me go step through the gateway and I'll be at my destination. And so I jump straight from conflict to conflict to conflict. And the journey to the conflict is part of the story. You start to lose that if you allow the magical side of the nature too much independence in your world. And I do think the journey is as important as the destination in stories. So I think that could end up backfiring if you, allow magic too much power in your world. So, and I could be wrong, write the story you want to, but I guess beware. Because there's always some jerk like me who like, that's not the way I would do it.
But I think you make a valid point, not so much about the way to do it, but the fact that, well, then you get the reader questioning, just like we always make jokes about, well, how come the Eagles didn't just, take them to Mortar from the get-go? Why did they have to rescue them from? Why couldn't they have just taken them there?
Over and over again, just fly right over.
Drop a, the ring like a bomb from the atmosphere into Mount Doom. Like, why did we have to do this?
Yeah, I think it's natural. I think, and everyone really wonders those kind of things when you're engaged in stories, and they're important to think about. Well,
right. But my point is, if you're going to add like teleportation magic and whatever, like there should be a limiting factor that's more than reasonable and doesn't take people out of the story. Like, oh yeah, we can teleport, but oof, boy, it is costly. It's a big toll. We have to make a deal with a demon. It's like a huge deal.
Yeah. You would see, I think it was in Tiger. I don't think that's still the name of it. The book Rejaunting, the idea of teleportation was the first time I've ever seen it. It was an old science fiction book, but it impacted society so much that rich people would make their homes with shifting walls and would be very dark because they don't want because you would have to be able to visualize where you're traveling to. And so if it was always shifting around and it was always dark,
nobody could teleport in.
No one could teleport into your property. So it'll protect your property. But for someone like me, whose house has a, design that you can look up online, right. They could visualize and jaunt right into my house. So, but that's the interesting thing too, that you can explore as the writer, if the theme is to explore, what would it be like if this fantasy thing was real? Is you can explore how it would affect society. What would the difference be if I could teleport anywhere, or I could, gate through hell to the next town, which might not be the most smart gate, but whatever. It's
it's the only one.
Big for interesting story.
Or like, yes, you can teleport, but when you do, every time you do,
Is there a cost to you?
There is. Well, there's a super net because you're traveling between parallel dimensions to get from point A to B. You're not folding space and time. You are going through a different route. It just happens to seem shorter to you, but in the process, there will be tag-alongs. There will be stowaways on every trip. You cannot go through.
You could bring something through with you,
right?
Or something could decide that it doesn't want you to make it.
Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah. So actually, Wheel of Time, the books at least did a good job with that, where they had a way that you could travel faster than if you were in a couple of different ways, really, that you could travel faster. But there were huge risks to doing them. And one was used twice, and even the very powerful characters, I don't think ever even considered using them again, because it was, the second time they used it was so horrific that it was just like, okay, and they gained nothing. It was an irony where it cost them more than they gained.
Well, it's like Dune. I mean, Dune is all about travel. I mean, it's about culture and war and people native to a planet versus people that are invading it for resources. And what you don't really realize is that, or people that is not really stressed enough, is that it's all for the sake of travel. The only reason the resource on the planet of Arrakis is so valuable is because it allows the beings that control interstellar spaceships to do it. Like the spice is the only thing that allows them, that grants them, I don't know, the focus, the ability, they can see far enough ahead of them physically to be able to travel and not crash the spaceship. So it's all about travel.
Or the other interesting travel related incident here, could be at what lengths will you go to prevent other forms? Let's say spice is the only way we know how to travel today. What would you do if someone came up with another faster than light travel method? What lengths would you go to protect your power base by stopping other forms of travel? Which is something people are always concerned about, right? Like big gas will prevent electric cars. And people are, I think rightfully so, are concerned that people who make a lot of money from A will try and protect A from B. You see that all of the time in protection laws. So it's another great way to explore traveling, is like what happens, when you're monopoly. Like I do have that inn and someone's trying to come up with a motor lodge. No, I have to stop the motor lodges, or I can't let people Airbnb in my fantasy world. The king, I need to get the king to stop out this new Airbnb thing going on, So, these are interesting stories today where the idea of, and that's relevant to today, right? Where it's like hotels do not like gig people, renting rooms out. The same way that people who drive taxis hate, Lyft and Uber because it affects their livelihood. And so some of these travel related like themes that you could pull out of here, how do you do food? Is there that box of food that shows up for me every day magically that's like a subscription box of food that I could have sent to my house? Could I do that? What effect would the people who used to supply the food think about that along the travel path? So it's especially think of what conflicts there are in the world around you today, and when you relate it back to the topic is, do I see threads that connect them? Because it's the conflict and characters that make the story, so you need both. So these are all of the opportunities you get when you overthink stuff the way I do, and I know all of you do if you're listening to this episode still.
So takeaways. My big one, get a ferret. The Dune spice is the Charlie card of Arrakis.
The Charlie card, that's right. And don't be a dime short or you never come back. And the funny thing was when I moved out here,
never go back. Sorry.
My mom had an album from the Kingston Trio, who is this band, who who came up with a song. And I had this album back in the early 70s. When I moved to Melbourne, Florida this year, they actually played. I can't imagine it's the same, all of the same people, but the Kingston Trio was playing in Melbourne, Florida this year too. So I was, or Melbourne as people call it around here. I guess I've not yet conceded that pronunciation, but it was kind of funny that, you know, this Boston band. Well, then again, everyone from the Northeast lives in Florida, so
yeah. This is like everyone in LA is from New York.
That's right. And everyone from LA is now in San Diego.
No, that's not true because it's way too expensive.
I'm making that one up. Yeah.
San Diego is an extremely expensive place to live.
Well, it's funny. My, I guess, brother-in-law, who I met just a couple of years ago, lives in the San Diego area. And when we were looking to buy houses down in Florida, he was sending things in the town he lived in to us at the same price point, and they were disgusting. Like, I would not.
Just too small.
Well, and like for like $500,000, it's like you're finding like literally like junkyards and yards.
Yep.
So yeah.
And you know why?
I don't have enough wealth to gentrify that, I guess. So
it's because you can set your watch to the weather in San Diego.
Yep. Yes, you can.
That's why. Yeah. What's it going to be? 72 and sunny. What about tomorrow? 72 and sunny. It's quite a nice place to live.
Yeah. Well, and he was actually in a beach town near San Diego, so it was even worse. So a highly desirable place.
Coronado Springs, maybe? That is like the place to be.
Maybe.
That's it. That's where my uncle used to live.
There would be a lot of trash in his yard. He could have still sold it for quite a bit of money.
That is the hoity-toity place to be.
But I don't know if it was the hoity-toity place to be, but it was a place where he could live close to the ocean. Because
all of San Diego is,
it's close to the ocean, but it's not necessarily easy to get to the beach.
Well, that true.
Yeah. Where he lived was easy to get to the beach. So camping or lodging, eating, walking, those are your three big ones to consider. And remember, it's like, there's a lot less room for error in the life of people in this age. There's a lot more risk to travel, not just in what happens where they're on the road, but what happens where their home is from, right? Who's taking care of their home? What's going on the home front when they're gone? I would imagine you would typically travel with the majority of your spouse and kids, but maybe not. You have to protect the farm. You can't let insects or orcs overrun your farm when you're out on your travels. So that's my other big takeaway too, is we're talking about the traveling side of things, but there's always the home front. So now for the world building task of the day, think about having your people, how do they get to work? Where do they work? If you live in that medieval shire, do you
probably just step outside?
Do you work at the manor house? Because you probably don't live there. Most people who work on the manor probably don't live close to where they work. So that's an interesting thing. Or if you're a warden, you're maybe away from your home for days, but you're trying to protect the livestock, the wild livestock of your Lord's land. So think about where they go to work and how and where they travel for fun. People need entertainment, and they'll come up with ways to do it by themselves, but there's always aspirations, things that drive people that helps create the conflict that makes stories happen. So where do they work? How do they get there? And where's the fun and how do they get there? And where do they want to go? Where do they really want to go? And then for the real world task, this is super important. I want you to walk to work for a month. Just walk to work for a month. And wherever you live, think about that. What's the temperature outside today?
What's the terrain like? How many
What's the terrain like?
wild, dangerous animals might I run into along the way? Does anybody want to rob me between points A and B?
That's right. Do you find rogue Jeffrey or peasant Jeffrey on your trips? Who knows? Or both. Because if it's my character, there's a thief in there somewhere. It's my personal trope.
Mine's going to be a necromancer. He's going to put your soul in a jar.
And think about it too, it's like I had a boss who lived 2 hours away by car, from where he worked.
Crazy commute.
And for years he would do this. That's a crazy commute, but imagine pre-car. Besides it probably being impossible, that's 5 days a week he had to travel, 4 hours on the road. And that itself is probably not unheard of, but the distance is much shorter if you have to walk. So it depends on how bad you want the job. And if there isn't a lot of opportunity, you might be forced to. But so walk to work for a month just to see what it's like, safely though. And talk to your doctor before doing anything.
I'm just going to walk to my car. Is that?
Or I would just walk to your car and think about what it would be like to drive.
Yeah,
now,
that's mine.
It's probably the safer approach.
That's going to be my chosen method.
Well, for me, I work in my own house, so it's probably not quite as scary.
Yeah, it's not real fair to make that comparison.
When my 4-year-old is in a mood that's like a wolf. All right, folks. I hope you all have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time. We're going to go deeper into this, even deeper, and we're talking about how a caravan driver can change a culture.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.